Good evening. This is the Finance Committee of the whole of the Rochester Board of Education. I'm President Cynthia Elliott. I'm sitting in chairing this meeting for Vice President LeBron, who is the chairperson for the Finance Committee, but she is out today, and I will be chairing this meeting. And so the next order, so welcome. The next order of business is that we have two commissioners that are video conferencing, Commissioner Patterson as well as Commissioner Malloy. So I'm going to ask for a motion to suspend policy 2350 that basically says that we can only have one person who's conferencing in via video. So can I get that motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, and welcome Commissioner Malloy, and welcome Commissioner Patterson. The next item on the agenda is speakers, but I don't think we have any speakers.
There are no speakers or comments.
No speakers or comments for this meeting. Next item of business under discussion topics is the claim audit report review with Naraki Smith LLP. Do we have someone to?
Yep. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for making time for us.
Good evening.
We are here to present our, we actually have a year-end report. We do issue reports monthly to the board. And at the end of the 21-22 year, we compiled the year-end report to summarize what transpired in the past year with a couple of recommendations that we've been speaking to discussing with management over time, and we'll continue to provide the services and issue monthly reports. But we wanted to present to you a year-end wrap-up for 21-22, and of course answer any questions you might have. If we have the ability to share our screen, we'll pull that up for you and field questions.
Any questions to, can you tell me your name, please?
Yeah, sure. I apologize. I didn't introduce ourselves. I'm Darren Ecabelli. I'm the partner at Naraki Smith. Rich Fatuli is also here in the tiles. He's a supervisor on the engagement and handles really the day-to-day. We'll spin through the highlights of the report within a few minutes and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I think you're gonna present, or do you want us to ask questions? Do you want to make a summary of the report? Say that again?
I can present if we have permission to.
Yes, please.
It's coming up.
Yep.
Right. So this is our June. Do you have the year end?
Like it.
Perfect. So what you are seeing is our year-end report. Just to remind the board, we audit 100% of the claims against the district. We audit based on district policies and applicable laws and regulations. Our review is comprised of verifying the accuracy of each payment, the accuracy of the information entered into your systems for payment, making sure that each payment is authorized, it's supported, it agrees to contracts and prices previously negotiated by the district. So on this page of the report is kind of a summary of the total number of transactions we audited for the district this year, which is 27,576 total claims, which amounts to approximately $677 million. Of those total claims, we've made inquiries into 4,796, totaling approximately $61 million. And currently outstanding, there are 565 claims with a total approximately $250,000. So as you can see below, there is a breakdown of this information in the 4 systems that we audit: PeopleSoft, Concur Invoice, Concur Expense, and as well as the purchasing card transactions. If you move to the next page, we've made some recommendations pertaining to areas in which we see a high number of inquiries. The first would be payments that are made on invoices over 90 days outstanding. The recommendation here is that we increase the timeliness of payments. This will ensure that the district avoids late fees, possible duplication of payments, as well as ensure that expenditures are recognized by the district in a timely manner. Observation and recommendation number 2 focuses on invoices that are dated prior to purchase orders. Basically what this means is that the district did not follow its purchasing policy and encumbered the funds and encumbering the funds prior to committing the funds to a vendor. So this also doesn't allow the district to plan out its purchasing activities. So we recommend that the district enforce its purchasing policies and require individuals that are, committing the funds to encumber that in a requisition and purchase order process. And the last recommendation has to do with the timeliness of supporting documentation for the purchasing cards. As with any credit card, the district automatically incurs the expense. What we're seeing here is just a timing from being able to have that supporting documentation ready for our review and when that is made available. So the district automatically incurs the expense, and therefore, we're auditing, but they might not have received the items, or may not have, incurred that in terms of traveling. So there is kind of a time delay in terms of supporting documentation, which is where this recommendation comes into play. The next 4 pages of the report are graphical representations of the different systems. The left side of the page compares the total number of inquiries compared to either the total number of transactions for each month, or the total dollar value of the transactions for each month. And the right side of the page shows a breakdown of inquiries as a percentage of total inquiries for the entire year. So, that is prepared for each of the 4 systems that we audit based off of. So if there are any questions, we would be happy to answer those at this time.
Thank you. Before I open it up for questions, can my mic be turned down some? Thank you. Thank you. That's better. Questions for the firm? You have a question?
I have a question related to the presentation, but I don't know if the firm would be the one to answer it, maybe more administrative focused. But I do appreciate the presentation. Thank you very much. And I had an opportunity to kind of scale the Excel spreadsheet that itemized everything. And so a lot of my questions were answered. I guess I want to know if there's been any preliminary adjustments made based on the recommendations, because I do see that the recommendations were submitted July 22nd, and we're only in August, so not a lot of time has gone by, but any preliminary thoughts around the recommendations that have been communicated and what initial adjustments are being made?
Commissioner Simmons, I'm going to ask Vern to come up to the front. He can answer at this time.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Sorry about that. So the third recommendation had to do with P cards. And if you look at the first page of the report, on the bottom lines, you'll see that the majority of the outstanding inquiries and the dollars are related to that. We're in the process of changing P card vendors, and so essentially most of the P cards are not in process now. Only a handful of people have a pilot P card, so we're working with the new vendor, working through the processes, make sure that the information flows, the documentation flows are good and timely, and that the payments are made in a timely fashion. Based on the pilot program, then, we will be developing training for everybody. And in addition to this, one of the state monitor's recommendation did relate to this area to make sure that when we have situations going forward where people are not compliant with getting the documentation and turning it in on a timely basis so that we can then process the payment, that we have a progressive steps to take in that regard. So part of that would be, it would eventually lead up to individuals who are non-compliant having their P card privileges removed. And we have to look at P cards as a privilege. We're trying to facilitate small purchases, high volume purchases for people so that they can do what they need to do for their jobs and for the schools. But by the same token, they also have the responsibility to follow the procedures and processes and make sure they're submitting all their receipts and everything on a timely basis. So again, as we go forward, you'll probably hear some noise related to that when we do come into conflict with different situations. But again, as we work through that, we'll want to be working in a cooperative fashion with folks, hoping that they are, doing the steps they're supposed to do so that when we get a report like this next year, this number is greatly diminished. Any questions about P cards and what we're doing there? Okay. The first one is a difficult one in that what's happening is we have a number of invoices going out to the departments. Some departments like to get the invoices directly, and that's how they use it to monitor what they're doing and manage their expenses. But really what we need to do and what we'll be working to do this year is that all invoices come directly to the accounts payable department. And then we can copy the different departments on those. What happens is these invoices come out to various departments. They may not act on it. They may question the invoices not being accurate. That's typically what happens is, well, you invoiced us for 10, but we only got 6, things of that nature. The problem is then sometimes, though, that they just get overlooked in the crush of doing all the work in the schools and the departments, and they don't get to the accounts payable department in a timely fashion. So we'll be looking to work with all these departments in order to make sure that they're coming into accounts payable, that we can then, have a cooperative arrangement with them that, okay, when they come in, that they can access and look at them and do what they need to do in order to manage and make decisions. Because ultimately, part of the purchasing process is it's up to the departments to receive the goods or services. So we issue a purchase order. The goods and services are delivered. The receiving department have to acknowledge that. They have to receive the goods in the system as part of the audit process. And then once all that's done, the invoices are done and everything matches up, then the payment can be processed. So that's where we're on number 2, or item number 1. And number 2 is the most challenging one. Because number 2 comes to our ability to, and I'm not trying to blame anybody, please don't take this the wrong way, but it's a challenge for administration to make sure that we get contracts and things approved on a timely basis so that we can then create the purchase orders prior to, receiving the goods and services and the invoices. So that's not 100% of the problem by any means, but that's one of the issues, and that's one of the things that we as an organization have to get better at. Okay.
Any other questions from the dais?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Powell?
This is for Naraki Smith. On their on the chart on Exhibit 1, the pie chart shows a very high number of invoices over 90 days is 47% of all inquiries. Do invoices over 90 days outstanding automatically get questioned? Is that why it's such a high percentage of your inquiries?
Yes, so we do track them in order to provide this information to the district for improvement.
So they are automatic
Correct.
inquiries? Okay, thank you.
Any questions from Commissioner Malloy or Commissioner Patterson?
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Rebecca?
Thank you. So I'm trying to balance the way P cards have been used in the past with the fact that we have all of these departments who aren't submitting invoices in a timely manner, and I don't think they're separate. So as much as we're talking about P cards being something you lose the privilege of, I'm concerned that it's a lagging indicator. Like that you go and you spend all this money and then there's not follow-up in a timely manner, but the money is already gone. So I just needed to put that out there as a parent and as an observer that I don't think those things are operating separately, that there's some connection there, that if there's a way to make it so that those things are a little, just that both sides are showing a little more responsibility to that.
Absolutely, and there's certainly a responsibility on the finance department to work with the folks throughout the district to help them. I always say that the folks out in the schools and the departments aren't necessarily accountants, and we have to keep that in mind. And I always remind the folks in finance about that. We have to keep that in mind, so we have to work with them where they're at and to help them understand the importance and the time of processing things, why we have these receipts and things of that nature, that we have everything, so that we're being good stewards of all the district funds, and we're not paying things incorrectly and losing money that could help with programs and other things. I think one of the important things to understand is when the way the system is set up, when we enter things to be paid in the PeopleSoft system, it's automatically defaulted to be held. And it's not until after the Naraki Smith review that they make sure everything is kosher and is the way it should be before those things are released for payment. So there's a lot of checks, and there's a number of levels of checks and balances in the system to ensure that money is not being, and invoices are not being paid for goods and services that we have not received.
So I have some overview questions. In looking at this, when we look at, and I want to thank Naraki, the name of the company. So I'm sort of not pronouncing that correctly.
You got it.
Rfp Smith, thank you for doing this work, because when you look at the total overall picture of our claims auditing, out of 677 million, there's only $249,000 of outstanding inquiries. So that's something to be appreciative of for our accounting department. And then Naraki Smith also pointed out that we have strong clerical support. So I wanted to put that I wanted to thank our clerical support for, helping to manage and supporting in this process. And so, we're talking about out of 27,565 outstanding inquiries. And while, 249,000 is not anything to sneeze at, that's $250,000. Overall, we've done an amazing job in terms of ensuring that, we have control over that entire process. But I would ask a couple of questions with regard to when you observed that there were 2,113 inquiries that were outstanding. What does that, what's the equivalent of that in dollars as opposed to just percentage?
Could you just be more specific as to the item that you're talking about?
Number one, the total number of inquiries, you given us a percentage of that? If I'm saying that correctly. There are 2,113 that were outstanding. How much did that translate into dollars? Am I saying that correctly, or is that not?
I just want to find what part of the report you're referring to.
What part of the report?
Under observations and recommendations.
Oh, yes.
You have the percentage, but I want to know what dollar amount is that?
So that's specific to over 90 days. That's the inquiry related to
Right.
an invoice over 90 days. Let's see if we can find that in the chart. I don't know if we have it by dollars.
And then the same question for number two. In terms of those inquiries, how much money are we talking about, the dollar value?
Right.
Sure.
Just got to look that up for a second. Give us 1 second.
And Vern, while they're doing that, let me just ask, could any of this in terms of, any of this be impacted by supply chain issues?
No, and what I want to point out here is these are really best practices. So ideally, we would pay all invoices prior to being 90 days outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
This does not indicate that these were bad invoices. These simply indicate that we're not paying them based on an efficiency standard of 90 days.
And why is that?
A lot of times as the invoices don't make their way into the accounts payable department to be entered into the system, they are sent to different departments and different schools. Even though we discourage that, we will continue to work with folks that they are all sent into accounts payable. If they come into accounts payable, then they can be entered into the system, in a timely basis and be processed in a more timely basis so that this number would go down. So that's the real challenge for us as a district, to make sure that that happens. That's the one step we need to take to address item number one, recommendation number one.
So
But again,
like I said,
do wanna
overall.
point out once again, this does not mean they were bad invoices.
Right.
It simply meant we need to be more efficient in our procedures and processes so that these aren't outstanding.
Yeah, because 90 days really is a long time, and so, we do need to put that in place. And I know that our schools have a lot that they're doing, but we've got to, that's an area I think that whatever department, be that schools or be that even in central office, that we've got to improve upon so that they're not 90 days behind. Even, and not even thinking about whatever late fees that we have to charge, and I understand we don't get
We
charged
do
late
not
fees,
pay
yeah,
late
but
fees.
even in that regard, we still need to be, so that we are reconciling our books, we need to have that more timely, so, all right.
I agree.
All right.
And keep in mind with these invoices, they're already encumbered.
They already
They are
encumbered?
encumbered.
Okay,
So,
okay.
so the budget money and the resources have been set aside
Okay.
to pay them. It's just, again, becoming more efficient in
Mm-hmm.
our processes so that we don't have this kind of situation,
Okay.
as we can go forward.
Okay. All right, do you have those dollar values for me?
Of course. So for observation number one, the over 90 amount, it's approximately $15 million. And for observation number 2, the invoices prior to the purchase order date, it's approximately $36 million out of the total of your $61 million. So that's why it sparked your observation and recommendation in the report.
So I would have thought that the first one would have been the highest amount, but yeah, that's a lot of money. But again, when we talk about the overall of 677 million, that's a small amount, and we seem to be, having a good process in place. But of course, we don't want to lose any of the taxpayers' money. We want to account for it all. So, if there are no other, Commissioner Adams?
So I just want to be sure that I'm understanding this right, is that the overall summary of this is that we have policy and procedures in place that we just have not been adhering to, as far as the P card, as far as the invoices, just some things we've been slacking on, but we do have policies in place and we just need to tighten up.
Tighten up?
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah,
And,
arch your bells and the
I do
drills.
want to
Tighten up.
point out, though, the biggest challenge is the P cards. Because
Okay.
you're working with a lot of individuals who are doing a lot of small, high volume, small dollar purchases. And so we really need, as we roll out the P cards this year and extend it to more people, we really need to be on top of that so that, again, this finding is diminished or not at all. I think 100% of P cards is really hard to achieve, but that's our goal. Our goal is 100% on all these, and I will tell you the P card will be the biggest challenge.
So I didn't ask for the dollar value for the P card, but since you are, pointing it out, could you all give me what that dollar value is for P cards, if you don't mind?
Sure. It is approximately $218,000.
Okay, 218,000, right?
So yes,
Okay.
he said, it's a lot of transactions, but all dollar amounts.
All right, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the next, the next item of business is a motion to accept the claim audit report. Can I get a motion?
Motion?
Moved by Commissioner Simmons. Can I get a second? Seconded by Commissioner Adams. Any questions or comments regarding the claim report? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are we approving the year-end report or the monthly report, June 1 to June 30th?
All right.
Or both?
So we will.
President Elliott,
Yep.
this is a motion for the claims audit for year end and for June 2022.
All right.
So
So
both.
let me revise the motion. Do I need to have someone to take back? Commissioner Simmons, would you withdraw it?
Yes,
And-
motion.
Okay, all right, so let me do this correctly. Thank you, Commissioner Powell. A motion to approve the audit of ending, or for the 2021-2022 year-end report, as well as the June 2022 report. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion.
Moved by Commissioner Adams and seconded by Commissioner Patterson. Any other questions regarding this report? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Next item agenda is we will hear a presentation for professional development, the purchasing department, and the RFP process.
Take care, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
A lot shorter than Vern. Good evening. My name is Tim Schmant. I'm the Director of Procurement. And so first of all, I'd like to thank the Board of Education for allowing me to speak about procurement and the process. I'll start off by also saying that as much as it's very important, procurement, and it's very special and dear to my heart, It's not so jazzy in a presentation format, so I'll apologize up front. It's a lot of words, a lot of laws. And I'll get into why, like the cover, I don't see it up there, but you should have it in front of you. Oh, there it is. I mean, it seems a little gloomy and doomy, but it's really just to show that there's a lot of gray areas within procurement, and we'll talk about that. So that'll come into focus a little bit. So what I was asked to do was really to talk a little bit about what we do in procurement, hit the key salient points of what some of our processes are. There's a lot of confusing topics within procurement, so I want to hit on some of those. A lot of weird words in the procurement space. And then folks were very interested in the RFP process, so I just wanted at a high level to go through that. So again, thank you for your time. So talking about the activity in the procurement department, I have a wonderful team, a small team, but wonderful. They process 6,000 purchase orders in a year, roughly. And just so you know, you're not in the day-to-day, so just to be clear, what happens when somebody wants to purchase something, they have to submit in the PeopleSoft system. It's a tool, so everything anybody buys, you have a requester that requests the information. They put it in the system. Now this is the same system we're moving to the new Oracle platform. So some people say it's clunky and it's not efficient, and all those are true, but it's still a good system. It's got a lot of controls in place. So if I'm a requester, I'm putting it into the system. This is what I want to buy. Depending on the dollar value, the type of item we're purchasing, that would go into, the system knows what kind of workflow has already been pre-established. So certainly small ticket items, staplers and things of that nature, every requisition that gets put in, that boss is going to, their direct supervisor is going to have to approve that. And then it goes through a simple process, maybe only 3 approvers, and it goes to purchasing for us to create a purchase order. And no vendor really should be doing any work without a purchase order in hand. That's kind of the contract to do work, not a formal legal contract per se, but it is a binding document saying, don't do work till you start it, but once I have a purchase order in hand, the district has approved you to do the work. And so when Naraki was talking about number 2, that was things that did not have a purchase order that people were already probably starting to do work. Now, I'll also say that some of that, I mean, it used to be in the 100 million region with direct pays, but some of those were like charter school payments, some of the, you know, significant dollars too. You know, you're talking very significant dollars where direct pay, there's really no purchasing process, but we have started to figure out ways to encumber those funds early. And so a lot of those dollars, I think now 30 is a significant reduction from where we were, and we're still continuing to work on that, that number. And I know there's an individual that does a concur report, I think every 2 weeks, that gets posted to the executive leadership and the chiefs showing what was purchased outside of the system, and so we can act upon that. That's to answer Commissioner Simmons' question. So all that reporting is visible and transparent, and so that number should continue to go down as we think of creative ways to encumber kind of weird things like charter school payments and you know, even some of our healthcare spending that we're on the hook for, and benefits and things of that nature. So for things of significant dollar amount, you might have a chief approving that. You might have a principal first, then a chief. You might have a grant monitor if it's a grant. They need to approve it, that it's allowable in the grant. You'll have, if legal's involved, Adrian's team is in that workflow as well, all automatically put in based on what they're buying. And then the CFO and myself would be added to that workflow. But at the end of the day, it's always procurements that last checked. Did they get the 3 quotes? Is there the right documentation in place? Is the insurance attached to the requisition? So sometimes, although I have a very nice team, we are the kind of the gatekeepers and the people that have to make some of the tough calls. No, you can't buy that. That's a gift of public funds. We have to say no a lot, but fortunately, I have a team that's really good with the customer service side and being that police So that spend for that 6,000 POs is roughly, recently, upwards $350 million. So obviously the district is a very large spender. It used to be in that 200 range, but now with Arsa and Sirsa grant funding, that's significantly increased, putting a lot of pressure on the system. And another thing people don't kind of often see is we have a big database of all our vendors, and we have about 3,000 active vendors and probably 29,000 inactive vendors. And we keep them in, or if we're not doing work with them, they're inactive, but we don't want to just delete them from the system in case they then, win a bid or something. We can just turn them back on, refresh their information. But this is kind of the backbone of what allows them to get paid. So our team has to manage that database for W-9 forms, insurances, and make sure that address, the contact information, we don't want checks going to the wrong place. So that takes a significant amount of time in the purchasing department. Now we get to P-card. So I know it's been the bane of our existence for the last probably 7 years, but I just want to talk a little bit about why it's important to the district to get this right this next time around. And as Vern and some others have mentioned, we're going to the new Chase platform, has a few more controls in place. But at the end of the day, the thing we fall down on that's been said tonight was, it's getting things done in a timely manner and then having more governance around, the 3 strikes you're out. You've broken your privilege to have that P card, as Vern would say. And so hopefully with these tighter controls, at least in the beginning, less card holders. We'll take some guidance from the Board of Education. It's still a very important program to us, and I just wanted to hit on some of those things. So I know it's an eye chart, but like the first chart, you can still visually see, just in context of our spend. Oops, we're still in the same. Yeah, in that far left bottom quadrant, that little sliver, that's what we're talking about, the total P-card spend, and that was in the heyday of P-cards. But the next chart, again, you don't have to really see the numbers. I can't even see them, I apologize. It's 36% of the transactions went away. So the P-card's important because, again, it's low spend or low dollar amount items, low risk, and highly frequently purchased items, but it gets rid of about 34% of our transactions. And so what that allows, we're not stuffing envelopes, we're not cutting checks to vendors, we're not processing all those requisitions and POs that I just described. And so very efficient. In fact, the benchmarking would say for a purchase order, the numbers are almost approaching $200 for the cost of processing a purchase order, and that's industry and school districts. But for a P-card transaction, ours is about $20 for a transaction. So you can see the efficiencies gained by it as long as we can get those controls and fix our shop. And what a lot of folks don't realize either is that, again, back when we were at full throttle with P-cards, we were receiving a rebate check for $330,000, which at that time paid for my whole staff salary. And so, again, just a lot of good reasons if we can get this right. And I'll stand up here and say to you, we're going to work really hard. It's either going to work or we're going to shut it right down. It's all about fixing behaviors at the end of the day. And so just briefly, that most of the, like 90% of the transactions in the district are actually under, as a count or frequency, under that $2,000. And so that P card, that small hatched box down below, that's real data. That's right where that's where the wheelhouse for P cards is, and that's where it should be. And so we shouldn't be, people might not realize also that these cards have a lot more controls than people sometimes realize. You can't go to liquor stores, you can't go to many different places and purchase anything. The card won't even work at those. Those are locked down. Each individual, there's dollar thresholds for the day. There's dollar thresholds on a specific purchase. So there are a lot of controls in place, and even the reporting, like even through a formal requisition process that everybody follows in all districts around the country, I can say that we bought office supplies, and I can say we bought a lot of small dollar items, but for the P card, I can actually, for people that provide the Staples of the world in the P-card reports back to the bank, I can say we bought, 3.2 Pentel pens, 0.3 millimeter. I can get to the fine level detail. So actually, in some ways, P-card has a lot more information than a normal process. But again, it's just getting the controls in place as far as getting those expense reports in and in on time. Nobody's buying Lamborghinis for their driveways. I mean, we've had auditors here for 7 months at a time. Nobody's, taking advantage of that.
Just one question before
yeah,
you
sure.
move on. What's the maximum, what's the limit on a P card?
So for 95% of it, it's $2,000 in a single transaction, and probably $4,000 in a day. That's where we're heading. But there are there's like 2 people in the district, I'm in T, they buy a lot of small mice for the computers and things of that nature, and someone in the tool shop in the facilities that have a higher dollar limit. And I would say that's like $20,000, but they're the big spenders of the district, and they're screwdrivers, really small purchase items, but so keep an eye on that. And in the P-card we can, and just so you know, if you ever want to report on what we're buying, we have them broken down by like 70 different categories. We have all our vendors. We can tell you what anybody bought at any time and get you some really finite details of what's being spent with this $350,000. And P-card's no exception. We can really drill down to the details. Top 10 users, to your question. We have top 10 vendors that we use it with. We can, how many transactions, how many, what were all those dollar transactions?
I think the biggest concern we would have is more so, to your point, how it's being spent. Like here on the presentation, slide 3, you have the office and classroom supplies, the maintenance and operational piece. These are the core buckets that are affected. And so for me, my interest would be, especially when we're considering controls and making sure there's a process that we are doing our due diligence to approve things ahead of time, and that folks who need the items that are affecting classrooms and teaching and those type of pieces have access to these cards, to Vern's point, in a timely fashion so that we can execute the responsibility of teaching our children. So that's like my primary concern with any of this, yeah.
Very good, and I'll just say it because it's something to be cognizant of. Is just not the P card holder, right? So, I mean, we have on the procurement team an administrator that's kind of the police officer, but every P card has an attached supervisor, whether if it's a secretary, it's their principal, if it's a principal, it's the chief, so same with your office, there's always a supervisor. And so it takes 2 to tango in this kind of getting that processed in time. It's not always the swiper, that's buying that screwdriver. There's also an approval process before it goes to Naraki. And so I just wanted to make sure it's clear that there's a lot of hands in the pot that we can share some of the blame with. But that's what we got to get right. So I'll move on. I know I only have 15 minutes total, but e-procurement. Again, a foreign word for some folks. It's like a punch-out catalog or direct connect catalog. I feel we're fairly progressive. A lot of folks on the board today were around when Gary Smith was here, God rest his soul, but he was very good, and he was very progressive. And so some of these things we're doing, a lot of school districts don't have these efficiencies built in. And so he helped lay some groundwork for these punch-out catalogs like Staples, Grangers. These are all negotiated pricing. So like the secretary, again, it saves them tons of time. It looks like they're going into the Staples.com catalog, like you're going to Amazon, like any web, but it's not. It's really RCSD's Staples. And we already have negotiated pricing. We already went out to bid for these items. And so they can buy these items. It still goes through the requisition process and that whole approval process, but they don't have to do all the hunting and pecking and calling Staples and all these direct connect. There's already catalogs online for them to use, and so that's really I think an efficient process. And then there's the E-Payables Program, again very progressive, whereas especially for high dollar volumes. or spend items. Working with the bank, we basically are asking these people to be able to go, and a lot of controls in place in here, but we're not cutting checks, we're not stuffing envelopes, we're not putting them in the mail, we're not buying postage stamps. They receive a controlled payment. It's almost like a credit card number that's secure only for them to have, with a passcode, and that's how the payments are made to the vendor. So they get the advantage of cash flow. It's not in the mail, waiting to show up. And for us, it saves a lot of time and efficiency. So we have about $25 million of our total spend. We'd love to grow that with Chase Bank, they're our new bank, new E-Payables Bank. Try to grow that because that is an efficiency saver. And we help with Adrian's. We work hand in hand with Adrian's team on contracts, and we do a lot of our own bidding for stuff. And let me get into that a little bit. And this is where I start talking about the turbulent waters, because can we go to the next slide? I'm sorry. Yeah, you are on the next slide. The turbulent waters. So we're trying to always balance this. There's general municipal law, right? And that's the law. And that's when typically what we're talking about here are bids. So I have over there RFB, request for bid. And that's when we're buying widgets, things we can touch and hold. And again, this is governed by general municipal law, specifically 103 and 104. And so anything $20,000 or more, we need to go through this request for bid process, which is very pre-described. And for goods and services, it's $35,000. That's, let's say you're buying stuff, smart boards for $15,000. It doesn't meet that 20 threshold, but it's going to cost $15,000 to install them across the district. That would start to now say we need to start thinking about putting out a bid for that. And just so we're clear, like for paper, it's like items. It's not by vendor. So I can't say so 20,000 is the threshold for paper. I can't say we only buy 15,000 from Staples and 15,000 from WB Mason and say I can skirt the GML. We buy $30,000 worth of paper. We need to go out to bid, right? So it's not how much we spend with a vendor, it's how much are we spending on paper. And in this case, 30,000 would force us to go out to bid. And we do have good aggressive paper prices, by the way. So my team knows I don't look good in pinstripes, so we are constantly...
Me either.
We are constantly, and there's general municipal law, there's board policies, there's superintendent recommendations, there's school law, and so you're trying to navigate all of this, and then at the same time you got some of these grants from the state and federal government that have requirements, not laws, but requirements, let's say, and they sometimes are in conflict with this, and there's not a lot of clarity. That's why I say it's kind of, you're always navigating waters or walking that tightrope. But general municipal law is very clear about how we have to advertise bids and things of that nature, and how we have to take, you've heard it many times, the most responsive, lowest responsible bidder. So those are all submitted to us with sealed bids. We have to open them publicly and announce, and share the information publicly at one time at the opening. The word piggybacking is a real word. It's a strange word, but what that allows us to do, the state has realized that, it's probably more important for small, like Kendall, Holly, smaller districts. They don't have large purchasing staff, either do we, relative to our spend. But they say, it's not efficient for everybody to go out for RFPs for all these things when we can do them as a state. We can leverage the volume, get better pricing, do our own RFP, and then you're allowed as a district, and we do it quite often, we're allowed to, as long as it meets certain criteria, piggyback onto that contract. And so an RFP was done, and the prices were negotiated, and we're able to take advantage of the bigger volume because there might have been volumes pulled in from many different districts. And so then we can enjoy but we don't have to. We can use the piggybacking dollars or less, and we do that on occasion too with like Granger and companies like that. But if it's lower than 20,000, down to 2,000, we're required to just get 3 quotes, okay? So that's how we process that. Under 2,000, we're not allowed, but we often do get quotes to make sure we're competitive. There isn't, this is jumping into more of what we do, but we maintain, there's a MWBE, Minority Women-Owned Business Enterprise database the state puts out. And so, unfortunately, we've seemed to have gotten rid of our office of MWBE, but
That's actually because that role came to the board clerk. We moved that when Malik Evans was here as president. We moved that to our office, is what we did. We haven't done a lot with it, but we did move it to this office.
Gotcha. Some companies, some school districts have their own, albeit small, but small office, and it helps us be more, like say, proactive about. Now, we in procurement have taken on some of that. I know we've personally onboarded like 5 different MWBEs, because what we have to realize too, for like grants, a lot of the grants, they require a 30%, they encourage you to get 30% participation. But the way the state looks at it, and the federal government, if you're not on that New York State database, you might as well, you're not certifiable. And so what we try to do is encourage people, although it's a very lengthy, cumbersome process. I wish the state could step up their game a bit to get certified, but we try to encourage them, and we do have a voice if we, to try to speed it up with the state, but sometimes, I'm not sure how strong that voice really is. And so that's a very important part of it for us. We do a lot with the grants department as far as sending in grants to win awards in regards to MWBE. So now when we get into like RFPs, which we do for like transportation, food services, nursing, all those kinds of, because, did I go out of order here? Okay, so I'm sorry, if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so this was just really talking about, I thought there might be questions about somebody was asking, how do people know there's even an RFP out there? And so we use the, it's called BidNet. It's a government municipal site. So everything we do, we post on there, whether it's a bid or a proposal. It's put there, and for all bids, we publicly advertise. It has to be 5 days before the sealed bid is opened in the Daily Record. That's the newspaper record you folks vote on in January. So what happens is people should, and it doesn't cost any money for companies to register and say, these are the services or the goods that I provide. And so whether it's RCSD or Baldwinsville or Buffalo, whenever they post something to that site, people get notified, oh, it was a match. What they're selling or what they're buying matches what you are selling, and you can go to that site and pull down the information. And on the sheet, it's an eye chart from here, but there's all our bids are all posted there. What's nice about having this tool is we don't want to get in this position where I'm doing work for, let's say, Chris Miller's department, because I'm looking at him. We don't want vendors reaching out to his team and say, hey, can you send me this? And hey, what are you guys thinking? Would this be a good proposal? We want all questions to funnel into this site, and all answers funnel back through this site, so nobody can accuse the district of playing favorites. Simply just sending somebody the RFP, some people would construe, and not sending it to someone else would be construed as favoritism. So we can send a courtesy note saying, just to let you know, this is a professional courtesy that it's out there on BidNet, but you need to go and pick it up. And then also, by doing that, any addendum, any change you want to make, it happens all the time that we're putting changes or tweaks to it. Everybody's getting the same information at the same time. Nobody's getting lost because they did an end around. And so it is actually a very good tool, a government municipal site, and we can report on it. I can tell you, you know, 3 days into a RFP, how many people have downloaded it, and tell a lot just from that. Now, if we go to the next slide, remember I said over 100, so for over 100,000 is, I'm skipping around a little bit, request for proposal. Request for proposal is very significant because we're asking for a lot of information. We want to compare companies against each other and their solutions. I mean, this would be just like one submission. You know, we ask them to do it electronically and in a one original document signed. This is about average. There's some that are much larger, a few that are a little smaller, but that's from one vendor. So, you know, there's certain RFPs that you might have 25, 30 vendors, and so the team has to process through this many in addition to listen to presentations, but I'll get into that a little. But so over 100,000, this is your board policy now. The law just says we can't possibly think of every scenario like they can when you're buying widgets for services because it's complex. You have consultants, you got different needs. Services are a whole different animal. What the law says is that you have your governing body, you folks, come up with policies, which you've done, and approve those policies, which will govern how the district buys services. And what your policy says, 6741 specifically, if it's over 100,000, we need to go out for a request for proposal. So between 35 and 100, it's a request for information. And just so we're clear, I kind of show RFI as information gathering. You know, how big is your company? Where are you located? What kind of vendors have you dealt with in the past? It's used to educate us, but our RFIs also include this. It's almost like an amalgamation of the RFQ, RFI, request for quote, and information. So we're asking for some information to learn, but we're also asking them for pricing, and that's from like 35 to 100. And there's a few exceptions for bids and for purchases allowed under your policy. You know, if it's named in a grant, or that sometimes there's a sole source vendor, and so then we wouldn't have to go out for an RFP. There's exigent circumstances, which just doesn't mean I was lazy and I didn't get the time to do it. Typically, I mean, I think I can count on maybe one hand the number of emergencies we've done in the last 10 years. Running out of time. Could we go to the next slide, please? So talking about now the RFP process, because there's a lot of questions about this. So I hope it's on your screen. Yes, good. So project planning, you know, so we start off by forming a team of subject matter experts. It's a commitment. It's a lot of work, as I described, all the reading that needs to be done. In that, I'll walk through the whole process with that team of subject matter experts. But you can't be like half in, half out, right? So this is a very big commitment. If you're going to be on this team, you have to read all the proposals. You might have to sit through, or you have to sit through, if we do presentations, of all the vendors, and you have to do your scoring. So it's a significant commitment in time, because we do an awful lot of these. You can't just go to one and not another and then call that a fair process. And so it's important that team formation, I walk through the whole process so there's a clear understanding of that commitment of work. And that project planning starts to put together that statement of work, or, you know, what are we asking for? What are we going to be at? What do we want the vendor to respond to? You know, their requirements, are there prerequisites? Do they have to have certain certifications? And then we develop that scoring rubric, and you want to do that ahead of time, not after you've read them all, and then try to gear it towards someone. You need to establish, and again, municipal law, if we were buying widgets, it's responsive bidder who's the lowest price. Well, you have a lot of flexibility with an RFP, because now you can take things into consideration, like reference checks. Cost is one component, could be quality of, you know, similar work. MWBE status, so you can actually do it based on that rubric. And then that team needs to, you know, I look at it as like you're preparing, the work is all done on our side in the beginning to write that RFP, tell them what we want done, what timeline do we want these responses back, and outline for the vendor, what's this going to look like. and then we post it to BidNet. But now it gets lobbed over to their side, and now, the work starts on their side, and it's a significant amount of work if many of you are are vendors to other places in your other jobs. It's a lot of work, a lot of commitment, and so there's a whole question answer period where they can propose questions through BidNet, and we have a big conference where we invite all the vendors and we answer all of the questions, so everybody hears the same thing at the same time. That's through the pre-bid meeting. I'm into the review section. Now the time's come, it's due by a certain time a day. There's no leeway. I always tell vendors, don't make me the bad guy, because I'll have to reject it if it's a minute late. So it's all time stamped in the district. We have the clock that they have to get in under the gun. And then we have to sit down, we have to read all these submissions, take notes, and we meet as a team, compare notes. And then, it depends what we're buying and how, what kind of thing we're buying. You might have there might be 25 vendors, and boy, they're all good. You're going to want to invite them all back in to present, right? Or you might find in reading, there's really 5 vendors, only 2 of them understood what we were really asking. Don't waste our time or their time, just invite the top 2, keep that competitive juices flowing, and we want to learn more about those top 2 where the other ones weren't even close after reading their proposal. And so the presentations sometimes are everyone, or it could be a small subset. And then what we do, if they do the presentations, we don't ask them to read their proposal. We've already read it, but they can hit on how they differentiate themselves. They stand out above their competition. We spend more time asking questions, make sure we're clear on how good this company is. So we ask clarifying questions. And then there's that whole, after that's done, we do we do the scoring based on the rubric we've already established. And then, we check references just to make sure, even though everybody usually puts out good references, sometimes you learn more about talking with people, more details. And then there's a BAFO, or best and final offer. There's a negotiation process that we still have a couple of them still kind of, even if we think we know who we're going to select based on the scoring, we kind of leave it that there's some competition there, and that's a good time for us to negotiate better pricing. And then we communicate. But again, whether it's a bid or an RFP, they're told, until the Board of Education approves the resolution, they're not to start any, and they have a purchase order in hand, they're not to start any work. Okay. And so then I have in the little corner some of the contract, then it kind of turns over to Adrian's team with the assure sign process. People have to put an executive summary and put a summary in front of you folks as a resolution for approval. So that's me talking fast and a lot. So I'll just stop there and ask if anybody has some questions for clarity.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Patterson, do you have any questions of Tim? Commissioner Malloy, do you have any questions for?
I do not.
For Commissioner Malloy, do you have any questions for Tim?
Just one. I may have missed this just because I don't have the presentation up in front of me, and so it's kind of hard for me to see just on the screen. From start to finish, how long does the typical RFP process take?
So, Commissioner Malloy, yeah, so that's a tough question because some are very simple, simple things we're buying, but then we might have something like we're buying Power School, which is the whole backbone of the district from a teacher and, how we manage the student side of the business. So like a Power School could be like a 5-month process, actually. And then there's a whole contracting process with that, because that is very complex. But we can do an RFP in a month, and that's giving them time to respond. Remember, a lot of that time is their time. We got to give them at least an allowable time to formulate a response to answer our questions. But so 1 month to probably 5 or 6 months is probably what we've seen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Any, Commissioner Adams, any questions?
Good.
Ms. Hetherington, any questions?
Thank you. And thank you for all of the explanation. I really appreciate it. So how do you know how much the bid range is? Because so much relies on it being between 2,000 and 20,000, 20 and 35, 35 to 100. how do you know which range to be putting out a bid for? And then how much wiggle room exists, like when we're having an issue like now where we have inflation and there's a lot of things that are just changing. So where's that wiggle room? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a very excellent question. So sometimes, people think it's this like really like, once you hit this dollar amount, oh my God, everybody, you got to run out and do an RFP the next minute, But the way the law speaks to it is if there's reason, the purchasing agent, which you anoint in January, give me trust in that I'm going to review the spend data. So if it's reasonable to expect that we're going to, in the near future, spend in a fiscal year that $100,000, then we should go out for an RFP, And sometimes it might not make sense to do it right then and there, even though you think you're going to spend $100,000, because maybe paper in January, February, March is at its highest price point because of supply chain information, and you might want to do it because in November the prices are always down and then you lock in a contract. But a lot of it's looking back at what our historical spend has been and knowing things about, hey, where's that district heading? But some things we know, like when it's a big, you approve a new curriculum or we know it's a consultant, I have like a $200 in my head. I know this is a significant work. It's going to be months. That there's going to have 5 people here for 4 months. That's going to be significant. I might not know exact dollar amount, but even if it's 50,000, I can still do an RFP. We can still do an RFP. It doesn't, we can do it for something that's $5,000, but it's just you need to do it when you think it's reasonable to expect that you're going to spend that money within a reasonable time. So a lot of it's looking at past data and knowing where, where is the district heading, or, again, a lot of things, especially when we're talking about services, a lot of that is consultant spend, and we know consultants, good, bad, or indifferent, are expensive, and so it's just how big is this project? If the estimate they're going to be here for 4 hours, then we don't, but if it's significant, and we might ask for an RFI. Request for information, and send it out to a few people and just say, just getting some background information. What would something like this cost? No commitment, it's no. It's just, ballpark, what do you think it would look like?
Commissioner Simmons, you have any questions?
No questions. Just wanted to thank you for a comprehensive and
Thank you.
presentation this evening. A lot of good information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Powell? Dr. Jello, I saw your name up there. Do you have any questions for Tim?
Yes, actually, I was going to ask about the experts. Who determines who's an expert? And do you ever have observers who are not experts or observers who do not vote? They just observe the process.
Yeah, so typically what we have is we go out to the executive director or director of that area. So typically, like if it's a HCI type contract, they're going to own that contract. So human capital HC is going to own that contract. So in this case, I would ask Dr. Miller, who would he say are the subject matter experts in the district regarding this topic? Same with teaching and learning, I would go to the chief and the executive directors and just say, who are the subject matter experts in this area? Because again, a lot of this information coming in for an RFP is very technical in nature. And so you really want somebody that you folks have approved to bring on board, that for that very reason, you pay them good money to be able to, on the behalf of the district, knowing that very specific topic, whether it's a certain curriculum or it's something from human capital, you want the subject matter experts in that department. And they can bring in others if they feel that that's, that they're very knowledgeable about a particular topic. But most of that is not pushed on to people from procurement. But in the case, but typically there's no, like I don't want to open Pandora's box again, but when it comes to like the broker insurance, typically it's not necessarily end users of the information. So we've never had like the unions be, voting members. They're really district employees that the district has hired with the expertise. And then I think it's important that whatever broker is chosen based on the experts, that then they go to the voice of the customer and understand what the staff needs, what the unions are looking for, and really get the voice of the customer. But I think some of the end user, I don't think it's a great idea to open it up to all the stakeholders as you would once you start a process and then engage stakeholders in the solution. This is basically selecting vendors who you think can do the best job based on the requirements of the district is putting forth in that statement of work. I don't know if that answered your question.
So I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask.
Great.
So how is the rubric developed? And is that rubric developed based on whatever we are submitting an RFP for?
Yeah, so for a rubric, which is part of the RFP process, that's up for the team to decide, but you're absolutely right. Like some things, cost isn't nearly as important as getting it right, so quality might be 80%, cost 10%, but there's other things that, there's 50 vendors out there, they're all pretty darn good, and whatever we purchase, we're gonna get what we need, and then price might be 40% of the scoring rubric, quality maybe 10, because we know they're all the same. And so we have leeway, except for you folks have given, as a board, guidance around we need to make sure MWBE is part of that criteria. So you'll see in every one of our RFPs that MWBE is. Unfortunately, not all the time MWBE folks are out there. They're certified in New York, but it's always part of the RFP process.
So it's developed for a rubric. You don't have the same rubric for each?
No,
Okay.
no,
All
but
right.
there is, so there's
And
always I'm sorry to interrupt, there's always a category and a weighting to that category. Sometimes there's 7 or 8 of those kind of quality reference checks, MWBE cost, and sometimes there might be 4 and different weightings, but that's determined by the team. Right?
Okay, so define what is what does it mean when we say, because I hear the term the lowest bidder, but I also hear the term lowest responsible bidder.
Yeah.
Define that for me.
So, yeah, that's a very good question. So remember now we're talking about bids. Now this is the GML, this is the law side of it. And so all these bids come in, again, they get time stamped. Pre-COVID, everybody would be sitting around near the placement office waiting for us to publicly open it. They'd be invited in the room. It's not what industry does, but it's certainly what government does by law. And one by one, I read all those, what they've put in. So everybody hears what everybody else bid. And at that time, we don't select it. They all hear the numbers and they all know the lowest one's going to win. But it's until you folks approve them that, they know they really won. But
Well, can I just interject there? But you said the lowest, but is that the lowest responsible bid?
right, so then the response, so again, low bid you have to take. But responsive is, how I liken it, is if we're used to doing all this, let's say, facilities work, typically it's a local person, at least within New York, because it costs too much for people in California to drive here to do work on our buildings. But if there's a name that we've just never heard, we can do some homework and, maybe we do a done it. And this might just be a fly-by-night company just hoping for a crumb. So we really don't say that they're a really a good responsive bidder because we're not sure that they can actually. But having said that, if there's nothing we can prove, and Adrian, I think we've been part of people that have, to say someone's not responsive we've had to go to court for that because they were falling down on what they were providing, the services. We even had I'll just give you a true story. We had report cards, we had some documentation, but the courts seemed to favor the vendor and say, no, you got to give another chance. Because if you anoint someone, which we would have to do if we go to the next highest. That's kind of like a stamp on their head, you know, like you're not responsible bidder. You got to, I don't want to say blackball, I don't use that word, the government doesn't use that word, but it's a pretty serious accusation, and maybe Adrian, sorry to put you on the block, but do you have anything to add?
There is a responsible bidder policy, it's policy 6725, and that lays out the criteria that the Director of Procurement, you know, considers, and it talks about, you know, lack of certification, expertise, you know, their practices, essentially, you know, a track record, a resume, you know, any red flags that you would really see with a vendor that would give you pause, you know, any kind of violations, you know, from OSHA and things like that. And as, you know, kind of Director Sherman indicated, you know, there is a process to determine if a bidder is responsible or not that can culminate in a hearing, you know, in regards to that.
Yeah, I just don't want it to be that we got a bidder that's coming in at $10, for an example, and we're going with that person because, you know, he comes in at $10 as opposed to, you know, being able to do the work. That's my concern.
Yeah, that's a concern, exactly.
Yeah. What's the definition of preferred source?
So preferred source, and again, that's an exception under your policy for service and under general municipal law. There's only a few examples of that. Like there's a blind sheltered workshop for some handicapped folks. What the government or the state is saying, if they're within like 15% of the lowest bidder, you need to use them still. I mean, they might not. In this case, this is like an exception to their own law. You need to use that, and there's actually the correctional facilities by law is written into. And so then there's the blind.
Although I have a problem with that, but I'll save that for another day. Yeah, I have a serious problem with that.
I've seen that in some of the earlier discussions. But by law, so there are a handful. Core Craft is another vendor that we are almost forced to do work with them if we're buying what they have to offer.
Can
I just say one big thing that's happening now is like scanning documentation. There is a pretty big job for that, but they did a lot of homework to show that they could do the work, and their pricing was competitive. So for student records, and that's the biggest one going on.
Yeah,
now.
let me just put on record why I have a problem with the prison systems they get an opportunity to bid because the amount of money that the prisoners make is like $1 a day. I mean, you would go into prisons, have prisoners to do this work. When they could come out, we can put them in our community, and they could be making, you know, at least minimum wage. And so I have a serious problem that we would accept a bid from a prison for slave labor. I have a serious problem with that, and I'm glad that you brought it up so I could put it on record, because that really is exploiting a population, and I have some serious issues with that.
I'm glad you clarified that.
All right, thank you. And then
good perspective.
I got two more questions, but one is, what is the sure sign? Is that something I should be asking Chief General Counsel?
He's the expert.
Yeah.
All right. So a sure sign is a technological tool that we use to really route our contract requesting system. So a couple years ago, you know, all this stuff is done really paper and pen, and folks would essentially complete a request form when they wanted a contract, and you know, either email it around or go from office to office to collect signatures. So really with the help of you know, Glenn and his team, we were able to, during the pandemic, really digitize that process. And so that's really the tool that we use for the routing of contract requests in a digital form.
Okay. And my last question, you can tell I was paying attention because I had a number of questions. How is the ARP and Sirsa funding impacting our RFP process?
Well, we have a lot of them. And so actually both ARP and Sirsa procurement department actually put in for only to the life of the grant for 2 positions, because we knew we were going to have an increase of like 20 to 30 RFPs in addition to just all the additional spend and new vendors, all the things we talked about early. But it's is it pressuring? I'm looking for another word, but is it having is it pressuring your process, your RFP process?
your department with having to, and we haven't spent the funding the way we should be spending it over time. And so, you know, we're at the point where we need to spend this money. And so how is that like I said, impacting your department? And are you feeling any kind of pressure of the process because we have to spend this money?
Yeah, I mean, so again, good question. I think the pressure I'm feeling is that how do we actually do this quick enough, because it takes quite some time between the legal and the procurement process to get through. So I'm just feeling a little queasy about just how fast and nimble we are. And I've worked with Adrian and the superintendent's office and the chiefs. You know, can we do contracting for the life of the grant at least, you know, then ease some of actually even the contracting process to try to speed that up a little bit. Yeah, none of us want to be here and try to give money back to the state. So there is pressure, but I can tell you, because I don't look good in pinstripes, you know, my team is still keeping me in line, and we do follow all the policies and procedures. I just wish there was a way to shorten all this stuff up. But,
is encumbering some of those funds, would that be helpful for the RFP process? Let me just ask you, or if you, through you, Madam Superintendent, maybe Vern could help with that question, or?
No, I don't think encumbering the funds, because that would say we're pre-encumbering would be when we put in a requisition, but a PO, when a PO's cut, meaning we've already selected a vendor,
Okay.
that's when we can encumber them.
Okay.
So it really wouldn't speed up the process at all. It's just trying to
As
look for
Tim said,
efficiency.
though, if we could do it the life of the grant, that would be
That would
incredibly
help.
helpful.
That would help, for sure. But it's still a race with the clock, and, you know, I personally don't think it's just our problem. I think other districts are feeling that.
Yeah.
Wish there was a little better planning time, but it is what it is, and this is a great opportunity, but it's everybody's running fast. And with the hiring market, it's just hard right now. And even, I'll just tell my person, I had a good person join the team, wonderful, but other opportunities in the district, and you know, they're moving. So it's just hard to get people to come
I know
to
how you
work.
feel about that one.
Yeah.
Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, I just thought, since we were
didn't
talking
hear.
about the responsible bidder policy earlier, policies 6725, that some of us up here on the dais would remember that Van White added a couple items to that list. You might remember this yourself, President Elliott. I'm not sure about item J, but all you have to do is look at item J and know it was written by a lawyer. It was introducing the idea that any finding of discrimination, either at the New York State Division of Human Rights or at the a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, that didn't used to exist.
Yeah.
So someone could be in complete compliance with every other law and be in violation of this. And prior to the introduction of this item in our policy, we could not say no to that bidder if they had an definitive determination of discrimination as part of their employment practices. So I'm anxious to elevate that to show that, you know, the Board of Education members past and present took an active role in making sure that our bidders were also good corporate and social citizens. And that's something we can be proud of.
Tim, if there are no more other questions, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Nice
Appreciate
job.
it.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the presentation from ACI, the TNTP. That is Dr. Miller.
Good evening, Madam President, Commissioners, Superintendent. Tonight I'm going to be presenting on leadership development in the Rochester City School District. And this is in preparation or in follow-up really. Last week you approved a contract with CTAC, and next week we're bringing forward a contract with TNTP. And so I wanted to, it's a nice build off of Tim's presentation in terms of spending the ARP and Sirsa dollars well and thoughtfully in a planned, strategic way to ensure that we're making the most of those dollars. And school leadership is an important lever for student achievement and well-being. And leadership is second only to the classroom instruction that occurs in our classrooms with our teachers. And that's incredibly powerful because there's only one principal in each school. And so as a person, as a single person, they have the most ability and power to impact and influence what goes on in a school. And so it's critically important that we are thoughtfully investing in their development and in our leadership of the district, and that we develop tomorrow's leaders today. School leaders create structures that support teacher development and the working conditions that exist in our schools and the kinds of experiences that take place in our classrooms. And we all know that in order to transform our schools, we must provide an equitable education for our students, and principals cannot accomplish this alone, and so we need to work with them to ensure that they can develop sound leadership teams within their schools, and we need to provide them support. Effective schools are led by a principal who leads and develops others and has an influence and impact on others. Next slide. I'll let you know when to advance the slide, so if you could go back one. Thank you. So in the Office of Human Capital, our work, our aim is to ensure that we can recruit, develop, support, and retain the most effective, diverse staff that we have in the district. And we've been talking a lot recently, and we'll have an update on staffing and vacancies this Thursday. But another piece of the work is to ensure that we're being very thoughtful about how we develop, support, and retain our staff. And that's why we're focusing on leadership and using the ARP and Sirsa dollars for that purpose. Next slide. So in accordance with the recommendations of the state monitor and the academic plan, the Office of Human Capital Effectiveness Team was created to ensure that we are being really thoughtful and working in partnership with all the leaders in the districts, but also with ASAR, our administrators union, to ensure that we can develop and grow our own leaders here in the district, those that are in positions, those that aspire to be in positions of leadership, and helping to develop assistant principals to be future principals. And so in the independent monitor's plan, in the district plan, there was a call out for investment and in focus in turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, culture shift, and the roles of central office to ensure that those in central office are in service of our schools, and that those in central office are supporting turnaround efforts in the district and in our schools. And so next slide. With the support of funding through ARP and Sirsa, an RFP, request for proposals, to support strengthening leadership development was issued in January 2022 with an intended contract period of July 1st, although we're a little bit late in terms of getting that to the board, with renewals through June of 2023 with a renewal through June of 2024. And so it's the intent for us to plan and to work to develop leadership. What that looks like is a vision for change, next slide, that we, through these efforts, focus on what we can do to ensure increased student achievement, that we support and empower leaders as they work with teachers through professional learning environments that they establish, and that we develop school leadership and district leadership around equity, instructional excellence, and staff development. Next slide. With that, there are multiple focus areas, right? We have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with the infusion of dollars through ARP and Sirsa. And so if we're going to do something to develop leaders, we need to go big and we need to look at multiple areas. And so one is strengthening our principal pipeline. Another is ensuring that the people that work with, lead, and supervise our principals are developed well, and those are our school chiefs. Another, that we provide intensive training so that all of our principals and assistant principals understand turnaround leadership competencies. There's a body of research for how you should lead, one should lead, and there's competencies that one should be working toward. It's important then for everyone in leadership in the district to understand what those are. That we also, number 4, develop a program for those folks that aspire to be leaders, and that we work with them to help them in their growth. Number 5, that we work on central office transformation. And number 6, that we evaluate what we're doing and how well we're doing it. Next slide. So we had 18 vendors respond to the RFP, 6 of which were invited for further presentation. And the outcome of that were recommendations for TNTP and for CTAC, which is the Community Training and Assistance Center. And next slide. What that looks like is that in each of the following areas on this slide, we have key areas of focus, the identified partner, and the projected costs for those partnerships. And so you see that it is a significant investment. We're also working with ASAR, and we are in partnership with the Administrators Union, and we have been for years relative to our CIAS mentoring program. And what this program did this summer was actually provided training to the mentors who work with our principals to support them in their development by providing a 2-day intensive training. Next slide. So what does that work look like? And so the next couple of slides will, at a high level, outline the work, the scope of the work that TNTP will assist the district in. And so on this slide, you see elements of the principal pipeline work. If we're going to do this work well, we want to ensure that it's focused again on those competencies and that everything we do is aligned to that. We've worked over the last year and a half to update and ensure that our leadership selection processes are objective and bias-free, and we've been fine-tuning those, but we'll continue to work with TNTP to further fine-tune those and get the best that we can out of our processes. That we also are in partnership with institutes of higher education, and that we are looking at our evaluation systems and redeveloping the evaluation systems so everything is aligned well. And then lastly, ensuring that career pathways and pipelines so that people understand with clarity what the steps are to becoming a leader and where they go after they are an initial leader, what might be the next steps after that, so that it's clear, mapped out, and that people understand career ladders that exist. Next slide. I mentioned that it's also important that we invest in those that supervise our principals, our school chiefs, and ensuring that they are critical to ensuring the growth and development and the day-to-day supervision of principals. And so how can we ensure that they too are also being invested in and coached and grown, and that they are in turn looking for the competencies and assisting principals and other leaders relative to this whole network of what we're trying to develop. And so we need to ensure that we are working closely with school chiefs, and they've been involved in this process of development and in terms of feedback, in terms of developing what we're doing. We've also worked with ASAR in that work, and will continue to do so. Our lead steering committee for all of this project and the work and the vision includes members of ASAR, includes the school chiefs and others. Next slide. If we're going to have coaching and we're going to have principals coached and mentored, we also need to ensure that those doing the coaching and mentoring are also aligned in to this work. And with that, we also want to ensure that leadership development in the district, if we're meeting monthly with principals, that we have a scope and sequence for what we're doing, how we're doing it, and that it's planned out. Additionally, we want to provide and ensure that we're providing all leaders with individualized feedback and a growth plan. And so leaders will have individual support plans to ensure that they are getting what they need when they need it. Next slide. I mentioned the CIAS mentoring program. This summer, we did do a 2-day workshop with the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and they provided that 2-day intensive training. And again, that's all aligned in terms of what we're doing here. Next slide. With respect to central office transformation, TNTP will be helping us to look at and analyze and discuss and review our organizational structures here at central office to ensure that we are getting the most out of how we are organized, ensuring that we're getting stakeholder feedback on the services that we're providing to the district and to the community through helping us to facilitate interviews, focus groups, and surveys, and to help us plan the culture shift that we need across the organization in terms of how we look at communication, accountability, data management, and performance management. They'll also assist us with helping us to develop our central office pipelines. That is, if someone's working in a position, what pipeline and career ladder growth might exist for them, making it clear, just like I mentioned with principals and assistant principals. And then lastly, providing training and coaching to those in leadership in central office. We have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with this infusion of money. When we look at other school districts, larger or smaller than ours, that have had opportunities to do the best creative thinking around leadership development, we've tried to capture all of what they've done well to ensure that we can infuse that in the Rochester City School District. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me start off by asking those folks that are online. Commissioner Patterson, do you have any questions of Chief Miller?
No questions.
Commissioner Malloy?
No
have any
questions, thank you.
Pardon me?
I said no questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Jallo, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I was curious as to how the work that TNTP is going to do, how that complements the findings from Council of Great City Schools, especially as it relates to HC and some of the other departments that they already have examined and made an assessment of those departments in central office.
Thank you, Dr. Jallo. I'm not so sure that the Council of the Great City Schools audit or review connected well to this. I think, frankly, I think we're in this area, we're beyond what they look at in terms of the audit. Staff and educator effectiveness is something that is not something we're seeing in all school districts. I think it's more at the forefront of what school districts who focus on how they're developing growth and capacity, they all do not have wings within their organizations that focus on that work. So I think we are a bit ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about this work being in the Office of Human Capital and how that work functions. But it does align to the plan, your plan, the academic plan, and ensuring we can meet the goals and aims of turnaround leadership and leadership transformation.
So let me just piggyback on that. Can you hear me, Dr. Jallo?
I'm sorry, yes, I can.
So if you look at that last slide that Dr. Miller provided, the first bullet talks about the review of organizational structure and district operations. There is a very clear and definitive section in the audit from Council of Great City Schools that really does parallel and complement that area. So there is a lot of overlap or very similar language between the two. And then if you go down to the third bullet, recommendations for central office culture shift and core function improvements, there are several recommendations in that particular section. So there is a direct correlation with those two bullets, and Dr. Miller provided information that extends beyond.
So Dr. Jallo, how do you respond to what Dr. Miller said and what the superintendent has said?
I just think when you're talking about three distinct organizations, and somebody has to be responsible for creating that synergy across what each one is finding, what each one is suggesting, what each one is timelines, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was a big investment in terms of time and energy of your staff for Council of Great City Schools to come in, and that if they've made some recommendations that you think are viable, that somehow they need to be able to be transferred to the reimagining of the school district that you're trying to accomplish through TNTP and, I'm getting my acronyms mixed up, CNTP and CT, is it CTAC?
CTAC.
CTAC, yeah, so that, there's synergy, so that, that's what I'm really asking, are those things complementing? And if they are, I think that's good, but I just want to make sure that they are.
And for me, it's about, are we spending money inappropriately if the Council of Great City Schools has already come in and did an audit? And it has to complement. It can't be that we're saying, well, and these are my words, that, their process is simplified and ours is much more sophisticated. This is much more sophisticated, because one of the things I know about this district is that I don't care how sophisticated it is, we don't always implement these processes with fidelity, and then they just, fall by the wayside. But I'll open it up for Commissioner Adams. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Ms. Heatherton, you have questions?
So I was actually wondering if, in a perfect scenario with the principal pipeline, in a perfect scenario, everything goes absolutely perfect, how many new principals would you end up with at the end of that 24-month, or it's 12 months that's listed?
So our aim is to ensure that we can grow and develop leaders so that they're better ready to take on the principalship. So we're going to be working through this program with all of our leaders that are currently here, and then also trying to develop cohorts of future principals. And so if we are successful, right, annually we would be looking at to work with a dozen to 24 leaders who aspire to be in the principalship. We're also trying to look at our current assistant principals and to develop individualized plans to ensure that we can grow them and get them better ready to take on the principalship. So theirs will be more individualized, but an aspiring leaders pipeline will work on some foundational efforts to ensure that those that aspire to be principals, we first have to ensure that they are well tuned into our priorities and our vision in the school district, and then they have to first get into an entry-level leadership position, which then becomes a further training ground for them to become better ready to be a principal in the future.
So my second question would be, how many school chiefs or chiefs of schools are there going to be? Because currently there's 3, and it's kind of, they keep changing over the last couple of years. So ideally, how many chiefs of schools would be serving?
So right now there are 3.
Correct, yeah. But there have been 4, and now there's 3, and the number just has changed, so I was just curious.
Yeah, at the moment we have 3, and we're looking at where we're going in the future.
Thank you. And the last thing is just the measurables of how effective this is. I'm just wondering if you're relying on TNTP and CTAC to establish those measurables, or how, sorry.
How the measure,
Yeah, how are the measurables being
how we're going to
established
measure
so we
this,
can
yeah,
tell
with the
if
outcomes.
it's
How
successful?
are we going to determine if this program is effective? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
So certainly, and I'll let Dr. Black jump in, because program evaluation is something we've been talking about otherwise, but certainly the process and the implementation and the evaluation of our services are critical. So it's built into thinking about this, but I'll defer to Dr. Black.
And I don't know if I need to pause this question, because after Chief Miller is done, we're actually going into a conversation around program evaluation, by which the TNTP proposed services are part of that bucket.
You okay with wait on that? Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Simmons, you have any questions?
Just a couple. These slides updated, right?
There was an update to slide 8.
Okay,
Just the image of it, yeah.
Okay, I was in the original one, then I was like, wait a minute. Okay, so I'm in the correct one. And I think Dr. Black answered the question I had around program evaluation. And when we're talking about TNTP, the new teacher project, I was taking a look at the site and recognized that they've, been around for 25 years. They've worked with several different districts, and I'm wondering, for my knowledge, any comparable school districts to the RCSD, and some of the ones that I saw successes with maybe were a fraction or, not as large as our district. So just wondering their success rate, and have they worked with any big fives, things of that nature?
Yeah, so TNTP is recognized nationally for the work that they do around education leadership and being a partner to public education. I know that I worked with them in Syracuse. I know that they've worked elsewhere in the state, so in terms of Big Five. They've worked with Chicago as a much bigger district, but they are all over the nation in terms of the work that they do. And some districts work with them for 12, 24, 3 years, kind of like what we're doing. But they have expertise in a variety of areas, and I encourage folks to visit their site because they produce a lot of really well-grounded research on what we should be doing in K-12 education, and they're really at the forefront of how they research and what the kinds of things they put together. And most of their reports I believe all their reports are on their website, and they're readable, they're excellent, they're great guidelines, and they really tackle topics that I think are really through the board's priorities and goals around culturally responsive education and how we think about recruitment and retention. They do a lot of very fine work.
I particularly like some of the work they've done around early grade literacy. So I'm trying to skim through, but I didn't get an in-depth review of the site yet. So from my preliminary findings, this was good information. Thank you.
Yeah, the publications, for anyone to go and look at their site, they have dozens of publications that are, 40 to 60 pages in length. They're excellent.
Any other questions, Commissioner? Commissioner Powell? So I have a couple. My concern is that we have principals now who don't feel supported by central office. And so is this program also for current principals to help them to develop their leadership? All right. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to make sure that we've got good relationships between central office and the school and the schools, because if that's not developed, and I would offer that you're not going to have people to want to participate in this because they don't feel valued or supported in this district. I got a call from someone that this new process that is being used for hiring, there's some issues with it that the schools have. And so it would seem to me that we would begin to communicate those processes if they're going to be changing processes, because people are somewhat initially being resistant to the processes because schools have not been informed of the process for hiring people for their buildings. So I would make that statement. The other statement is that there's some assistant principals out there who may not want to be principals because the benefits that they have as assistant principals is more than what the principals have. And so you have some assistant principals out there who are refusing the role of a principal because, I think in terms of vacation days, days off, or that kind of thing. And so you may want to look at what is being offered to principals versus what's being offered to assistant principals. It seems to be more. They don't have to stay, all hours of the night. They can just go home and, because they're not the leader of the building. And so you may want to find out, survey, that as being an issue and figure out how we can address that issue. And the last question I have is this going to be mandatory for people, or is this just an offering for folk who may want to learn leadership skills for the principal position?
Yeah, so principal pipeline and aspiring pipeline is really those who demonstrate interest. Those would probably be application processes to demonstrate interest. So somebody wants to become a leader, somebody wants to become a principal, and certainly there's always the nod and the encouragement that I think school chiefs and others would have in terms of encouraging people to do that. Every principal will participate in some training, one shape or form, in partnership with the Office of Teaching and Learning and the Office of Professional Learning. And so it's connected and integrated. And the idea is that TNTP works with us so that we develop a really sound scope and sequence for how we're thinking about and developing our leadership, so that it's connected to the competencies that we determine and that the research determines as a value. And it's all aligned to what the goals and the guiding principles are for what we want to see in our classrooms day to day in terms of student learning.
And so do we feel that the cost of almost $4 million is worth it, because we're saying that we are requiring principals to participate in this?
So when you look at this work, there's 6 different buckets of work to focus on, right? To ensure that we're, or 5 buckets rather, to ensure that we're hitting all places within the organization, right? So some of those are more opt-in, like I'm an assistant principal and I want to be a principal, or I'm a teacher leader and I want to be in a leadership position. And then others are, how do we ensure the professional development that we're providing to all principals, which they're required to participate in monthly, is connected to all of this as well. And then that our principals, how they grow and develop others. We have principals that mentor new principals, that they're connected to the competencies that we set forth, and that everyone is going to be evaluated. So how do our evaluation tools do we get the most out of it that aligns to what we expect out of leadership?
Yeah, my concern is that we're not spending $4 million and we're not going to have the participation that we need to have in this program. And will it be worth it? All right.
The other piece, President Elliott and other commissioners, just to ground it back to slide 3, where Dr. Miller does talk about the fact that this is a recommendation in the academic plan. So this is something that we need to fulfill. And if we don't do it this way, then we have to figure out another way to do that.
Yeah, and that's fine if it's in the academic plan. I mean, I'll support that, but we've got to make sure that, and I believe that Dr. Jallo would agree with this, we've got to make sure that we're spending this money with fidelity.
And that we have the individuals who are participating as
right.
such.
That's right.
I agree.
Thank you, Dr. Jallo. Okay, so any other questions around that? So Dr. Black, are you going to be talking about the program evaluation? All right, thank you. Dr. Black?
I had a question before that, President.
Oh, I didn't see the hand. All right.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would propose that HC do some type of a survey to see how many principals or vice principals are interested in being a part of this process, and then come back to us with those numbers.
Well, all principals will be involved in this work in one way or another. There's just different buckets of work, right? So all principals will participate. All principals will be evaluated with an evaluation tool that we develop or that we work with. ASAR is very invested in this process and working with us through it. They're part of the steering committee. So all leaders will benefit and participate in this work. Those that opt in, they're opting in because they're assistant principals who want to become principals, or they are teacher leaders who want to become leaders, right? So that's where the opting in is. Everything else is part of how we do business in terms of how we think about leadership in the district and what we expect in our leaders and how we grow and develop our leaders. So I don't want there to be a misunderstanding. Everybody's going to participate in this because this
So it is mandatory, it will be mandatory.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's,
All right.
the principals have to attend training, right? We do that during the workday, and it's led by the Teaching and Learning Office. This is really a collaboration of many facets within the organization, and it's connected to the academic plan.
All right.
Thank you.
Dr., anything else, Commissioner Patterson?
No, I just said thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Black, I'm going to ask, I should have asked Dr. Miller to stand up at the podium. Could you stand up at the podium, please, to present?
Good evening, President Elliott and Commissioners and Ms. Hetherington. This was intended to be a discussion, but we wanted to put a brief presentation in front of you. This evening, we are bringing back the conversation on Gibson, which is our program evaluation contract. If you recall back in June 14th, we had a conversation and a resolution come forth for Gibson, and that motion failed 4-2. In canvassing with particular commissioners, concerns around our presentation, the dollar amount, and the purpose of the program evaluation were in question, hence the failed motion. And so we're bringing this back to you because in 4 recommendations in the academic plan and in 1 recommendation in the financial plan, it calls for program evaluation to take place so that we can ascertain through the use of our ARP and Sirsa funds and our A funds which programs we have to keep and which ones we have to sunset. And for the Gibson contract, the selected program evaluator, we also recognize that in order for us to determine how we're moving, we have to look at our accountability and our fiscal stewardship. We have to ascertain the effectiveness of our relief funding programs. We have to have a rigorous evaluation as per the Sirsa and ARP conditions that were provided to us by NYSED and recommended by the Council of Great City Schools. And finally, this contract with Gibson, this scope of work with Gibson would allow us to complement and supplement our internal research analyst team. I want to kind of just highlight the fact that Gibson in this program evaluation contract would effectively be evaluating $92 million worth of programs and expenditures. So inside of the district right now, we have approximately 1,500 programs, initiatives, things that we do. Through our internal program evaluation team, they gather data from us using a pretty robust and actually amazingly dynamic system to determine what are the most highest leverage programs we have to evaluate. They identify the top 100 programs. That top 100 programs that need to be evaluated in time equals about $92 million, which also includes the TNTP contract. Next slide. So just want to highlight how we got to Gibson. This is a reminder of the RFP process, which Tim presented this evening. We started back in December. We went through the RFP development, solicitation of vendors, the timelines, the reviews, the proposals, and eventually we landed at Gibson, which is a national organization. The vendor selection is also listed there. We realized that 50% of the evaluation, so President Elliott, when you mentioned the rubric earlier, this is the indication of the rubric. 50% of the evaluation is anchored in the evidence of effectiveness. 30% is aligned with the desired outcomes. 5% waiting for MWBE, 10% for their financial evaluation, and then 5% for references. There were 2 vendors that submitted, and on the bottom you see the overall scoring for each of the vendors. Gibson being the vendor in the green, the other vendor who submitted being in the red. In terms of the scope of work and contrast, you recognize that this scope of work for Gibson as our program evaluator over time for 100 programs at about $92 million. It scopes over 3 years, with the first year being $400,000 worth of work, the second year also, and then the third year concluding at the end of our grant time of a $200,000 worth of work. So in total, the Gibson contract for program evaluation totals $1 million over 3 years to evaluate about $92 million worth of initiatives at face value. And then I'll pause there because again, this was a discussion, so I'm here to answer whatever questions possible. Any questions about what I shared?
So, Dr. Black, you did indicate that you had spoken to all of the colleagues and about this and giving us more education around this. So if that's the case, then I will open up. We don't have to go into those conversations. We understand now the need for this kind of program, but make sure in the future that's what you're doing. You know, I told you all about the Cosby piece, so don't just bring us anything any kind of way.
I just
So,
want to name that I have one other commissioner that I have been unable to connect
Okay.
with because of scheduling. And
all right, Commissioner Simmons?
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank you. I was one of the commissioners that was able to get some more understanding, because the $1 million was like, wait a minute, hold on, what exactly are we going to do with this? And are there options that are more cost-effective? But in context, with the number of programs we're serving and the offset of the $92 million worth of services that are provided, that type of thing, it did put it in better context for me. And I am a huge, I definitely am a supporter of evaluating the services that we say are helping our students and making sure that we are monitoring their effectiveness in a way that is strategic and going to produce outcomes, because a program is a program is a program unless there's an outcome. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Adams, you have any questions?
Nope.
Ms. Heatherton?
I was wondering, the 90 some odd $90 million, is that what's spent in one school year or in those 3 school years?
So it's over the course of 3 school years. So we have the expenditures of $330 million in stimulus funds. That's before any other title, any other A-fund program. About $92 million over the course of 3 years in identified programs is what's going to be encompassed in the scope of work that we've outlined for Gibson.
Awesome. And then the other thing was, is how are the results of what they find? Is that going to be shared with the public? Is that going to be kept in the district? Is it going to be shared with the people creating, who are responsible for these programs?
So actually, I think it's a combination of all of those things. So depending on some of the more sensitive decisions that we have to make, we have to determine what's for public consumption. But thinking about the program that Dr. Miller just lifted up around Teen TP and the work around various services of the organization, that effectiveness information does come out, because it will then help us to say, hey, in year 4, when we don't have the stimulus funds in the same way, can we continue this investment? Is it worthwhile? Versus something else that we say, hey, we're not getting the bang for our buck on student achievement or educator effectiveness. We're not going to continue there, and we'll have to make public for you all how we're making those decisions.
Okay, Commissioners, any other questions, Ms. Heffernan? Commissioner Simmons?
I just had one other question. So to your point, Dr. Black, you mentioned we will identify some programs that may not be suitable and that is sensitive. And my question would be, should we identify those type of programs? Is there going to be time to allow, like a messaging and then time for them to potentially make a turnaround before making that decision? Like, what does that process look like?
So I think that also is something to be explored. In the 100 list, there are all kinds of things. It's not just programs. There's software purchases. There's delineation of staff. There's training. So it's all of those things. I think as we actively partner and become good partners in terms of implementation of programs, where we find that the metrics that we're getting are not the metrics that we need, we are working with our current partners to say, how do we fix this? How do we remedy it? Or do we discontinue or sunset until another time?
All right, Commissioner Powell? Commissioner Patterson, do you have any questions for Dr. Black?
I do not at this time, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Other than to let her know, I think I was the only commissioner she didn't speak with, but again, I was out of country on vacation, so I apologize, Dr. Black. Please call me at any point in time tomorrow or, through the week when you're free.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, I think I also need to talk with Dr. Black. I didn't hear from you, so if you could reach out to me to arrange something, I'd appreciate it. But
I can't really hear that clearly. Can you repeat that, Commissioner Malloy?
I didn't hear from Dr. Black. She didn't reach out to me. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, so no, I'm just waiting for that meeting. So if you could reach out to me, I'd appreciate it, but no questions at this time.
So Dr. Black, you want to respond to that? Did you try to reach out to her?
For reference, we reached out to the folks who were the no votes.
Okay.
And so, in
Oh,
order
okay.
to ascertain, so Commissioner Loy was one of the yes votes in
Oh,
this
okay.
instance.
So
But
do you
I-
still need her to reach out to you, Commissioner?
For all of us.
But I will reach out.
Do you still need her to reach out to you, Commissioner Malloy? Because you were one of the yes
No,
votes.
I misunderstood, and maybe it's
Okay.
just the sound. I thought that they were reaching out to all of the commissioners in
okay.
smaller meetings. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Jallo, you have any questions? She may have stepped away. All right. So no other questions, thank you.
I need to highlight that this resolution will come back in the business meeting next week for a new vote.
All right, thank you. And then the next item on the agenda is the review of the Finance Master Calendar. And I really wanted, this is really something that Commissioner LeBron probably should also be reviewing with us. But any questions or any discussions on the master calendar?
I can just touch base really quickly.
Sure.
If you don't mind, in lieu of Vice President LeBron, and she will touch base on it when she comes back. But essentially, I think she raised it once that there is a real push to try as much as possible to get a comprehensive master calendar for all due dates for financial reports, financial events, budget, and everything. And so this is our first stab at that. And so you will see today, there were several reports that were done. Those are on the calendar, and subsequent months, because finance will be meeting every other month, you should see where financial reports are presented to the finance committee or subsequently presented to the business meeting. When finance does not meet, the financial report comes to the business meeting directly, and that's where we have the discussion there. But I do think it's a really great initiative here just to ensure that we stay on track with all deadlines, and at least the board is able to know what's coming up. And grateful, Vern is also working with me on that, and I know the new CFO will be working with me on ensuring if there's any internal things finance related that they make it to this calendar. So we will continuously keep the board appraised of this.
Thank you, and I do see that there's a meeting with the State Education Department regarding the academic and fiscal plan that's noted on the 19th.
That's not the correct date. It was moved to the 25th.
Okay, I haven't seen. I haven't
From
gotten the-
10 to 10:45, and then the board retreat is 2 to 5 on the 26th.
Yeah.
So we'll just have some updates.
Any questions about the master calendar for finance? Commissioner Malloy, you have any questions about the calendar? Commissioner Patterson? Dr. Jallo, you have any questions about the master calendar?
No, not at this time.
All right, thank you. Okay, sure.
I just wanted to share the parent groups are working together to create kind of a parent university for the budget. So they'll meet on the third Wednesday of the month of October. And I will submit this more formally, but for the month of October, for the month of January, and then March, as well as April, to try to bring more parents into this conversation earlier on so they can understand the budget, and then later on to actually feel like they have a voice in the process. So I just wanted to share that.
I think that Commissioner LeBron is talking about.
Participatory budgeting.
Yeah.
Yes, and that should be, the hope is to really begin that process in October, but those dates haven't yet been, we were waiting on the new CFO to kind of figure out how we were gonna get into the community regarding that. So that's also something that will be added.
Yeah, to really get, for folk to get an understanding, or better understanding. Commissioner Adams, you have any questions? Commissioner Simmons, you have any questions? And Commissioner Powell? No. All right, thank you. And then the next item on the agenda is a review and acceptance of the minutes of June 21st, 2022. Can I get a motion?
Motion.
Moved by Commissioner Simmons. Did I hear, who did it? And seconded by Commissioner Powell. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. The next item is the financial resolution review. This is the resolution packet. Any questions on any of the resolutions? And you are going to have to help me with this. It's just a matter of asking for a motion to move it to the business meeting, or?
Oh, no. So these are the resolutions that will be coming in September. So if folks have any questions,
Okay.
Please feel free to submit them now, or you can submit them to the question log.
Okay.
It's just kind of anticipating the fact that these resolutions will come in a month. Of course, there is anticipated that there may be additions, removals, and stuff by that time, but it really is to keep the board kind of up to date as to what's pending.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I just had a question regarding refugee school impact. Like, what does that entail?
Which one are you looking at?
I'm looking at, this is the August financial report. Okay, I apologize.
Oh, okay.
I clicked on the wrong thing, sorry.
All right, thank you. And so the next item on the agenda is, and we've already reviewed, we have not reviewed the financial report. So a review and discussion of the financial reports. Right? I saw you up here earlier, so that's why I got a little confused.
I was hoping to keep going.
Good. No.
All right, so it's our standard monthly package. The first item, item A on page 1, is our cash balances. The beginning balance was $130 million. We had receipts of $98 million and disbursements of $70 million. And our ending cash balance on July 31 was just over $159 million. It's pretty typical this time of year. In the summertime, we tend to have less receipts coming in. I want to point out, of the $98 million we did receive in July, $78 million of that was last year's state aid. Normally it arrives on June 30th, but this year it arrived on July 1st. So it's a little bit different. And our cash flow projections for the year are pretty much in line with past years. You'll find that our low periods for the year will be in the months of December and January. Are there any questions about cash flow?
Hearing none.
Hearing none. Next item is item C. We had special aid increases of $1.4 million. The largest items were grants for the optics program at East and Monroe, $460,000. We got an additional $400,000 in emergency connectivity funds monies. It's one of those pandemic resources provided for laptops. We got a refugee school impact grant for $313,000. We had 2 grants for food service programs, Breakfast After the Bell for $180,000 and No Kids Hungry for $50,000. Moving on to current projected revenues. And projected revenues are a little misleading. These are really just budgeted revenues. So you'll see under the general fund there is no change to the budget in the month of July for revenues. Special aid increased $1.4 million. Those are the items we just reviewed. And school food service fund, again, no change in the revenue budget for the year. Item D, any questions about revenues? Again, it's early in the year, so there's not a tremendous amount of activity there. Okay, hearing none. The appropriations, item D. Our general fund is, the budget for the year is $836 million. We have encumbrances of $91 million, expenditures of $20 million, leaving available appropriations of $724 million. And most of the encumbrances here are things like putting money in for school bus contracts, just large annual contracts we do. So we try to get those encumbered early in the year so we can pay those bills and keep our friends at Nowicki Smith happy that we're doing things in the proper sequence. Special aid fund. These numbers do not include ARP and CRISA. That's the next item, and we'll get to that in a minute. The budget was $125 million, encumbrances of $13 million, and expenditures of just over $1 million. Leaves us available appropriations of $110 million. And school food service, we have encumbrances of $7 million and expenditures of $300,000. The encumbrances for school food service are largely food contracts for the year. So you have a lot of those early in the year to get the program up and running. And they have a balance, unappropriated balance of $15.7 million. So any questions about those numbers? Okay, so item E is new to the package. We're showing this year the ARP and CRISA funding. We're showing them in their entirety because this is how we're managing them. So we can keep track of where we are in the totality of it because it's a multi-year funding. And for CRISA, we have a budget of $887 million, encumbrances of $18 million, and expenditures of $16 million, leaving $52 million unappropriated. For ARP, it's the budget is just under $197 million, encumbrances of $9 million, expenditures of $9 million, just under $10 million, and that leaves available appropriations of $177 million. This question was raised a little earlier about our spending patterns for ARP and CRISA. I think it's important to point out that even though these funds were, if you will, awarded in March of 2020, we did not start utilizing them until we went through the review and approval process with state ed. And in Chris's case, that was done in November of 21. So we didn't start utilizing CRISA monies until that time. And in ARP, it wasn't until January of 22 that these were approved. So that contributes a great deal to why the expenditures to date are so low. You'll see this year the activity picking up significantly, but we certainly have a lot of money available to the district to do a lot of programs. If we look at revenues received, you can see that we look at our total expenditures to date through the end of July. They were $26.2 million. You can see revenues received of $20.1 million. So essentially, there's about a month to 6 week lag between the month end with our expenditures and when we submit them for reimbursement. So we are seeing very good turnaround in the reimbursements of this funding. I know that one of the concerns was what type of impact would this have on cash flow? You know, if there was a very long time lag between expenditures and reimbursement, but we're not experiencing that, so that's a very good sign. Are there any questions about ARP and CRISA? Okay, related to that, I'd like to give just a quick update on, it's not on the report, but I want to give a quick update on CARES funding. The CARES funding just ended in June 30th, and we received there's two components of CARES funding. One was what the district received was $27.9 million. There was another $1.3 million that we received but they were for the non-public schools. So we were a pass-through. And I'm happy to report that RCSD has spent all of its funds. But I need to bring to your attention that the non-publics have not. There's about $500,000 unspent of their money.
So do we have that money, or is it a pass-through?
No, you only get the money reimbursed after it's spent.
Okay.
But while all the money was awarded to the district as the lead educational agency, 1.3 had to be set aside and passed on to the non-publics. So when we do the final reporting for this, we'll report in the entirety, and we'll show that there's about $500,000 unspent. But I did want to bring to everybody's attention, this was because we worked with the non-publics, but unfortunately, they didn't utilize all the funds.
So the fact that those funds are not reimbursable, because we are the pass-through, they have not used them, and those were allocated to do what for the non-publics?
Whatever the guidelines for the federal government were for the use of CARES funding that applied to Rochester, applied to the non-publics as well. So typically you used it for instructional materials, equipment, professional development, staff funding, you know.
So we become collateral damage, basically, because do we have any recourse for, for unspent dollars that have to be spent?
The only recourse might be is if the state and the federal government allow a no-cost extension for these funds, meaning, we don't get additional funding, but we have additional time to utilize it. Even if that were to occur, we would then simply continue to work with the nonprofits for them to utilize these funds.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I also want to point out that that's not the case with ARP and CRISA funding. ARP and CRISA funding went directly to everybody as opposed to coming to us as the lead LEA, lead educational agency. So when we look at these ARP and CRISA fundings, 100% of those numbers are for the district.
So I do have a question on that, on the ARP and CRISA funds. So we have 256 million that we have not spent to date?
We have 200, if you look at the bottom right-hand number for available appropriations, it's 230 million have not been spent or encumbered.
So are we going to spend that money?
We're going to do our best. But it's important that we do it. You got to remember, too, there's a number of levels of checks and reviews of these, so that it's a spent on appropriate program. You are one of them. The state monitor is another. The state education department's a third. So we don't want to be frivolous with these funds, but we want to certainly take advantage of them and use them to move the program and the district forward.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about ARP and CRISA funding? Okay, item F is budget journals. There's 6 pages of those. I just want to call your attention to 3 of them. On page 15, there is a transfer of $100,800. That was to fund the food for the St. John Fisher summer program. We don't anticipate spending all those funds, but that was kind of the high end when we were doing estimates of what they might be. We originally hoped to pay for these for that out of the ARP and CRISA funding. We found that those were not eligible costs for ARP and CRISA funding, and as well because we could not do it through the school lunch fund program either, because we're contracting through a third party for these services. On page 16, there's what looks to be a large transfer, but it's all within the health, phys ed, and athletics department. What we did there is when the budget was approved, we had everything within that department. What we've done is we've created a number of subclasses for each school and simply reallocated the monies still within the health and phys ed department, but for each school. And we did this to help them manage their money and give all the athletic directors more authority and ability to see what funds they had and to utilize them more quickly and efficiently. So really, while it looks like a very large transfer, it's simply an internal management process to help them deliver their programs. And the third item is also on page 16. It was a $145,000 transfer within transportation. This was simply an account code adjustment between the budget and how we want to utilize the funds. It's still being used for the same intent, but this is to pay for the field trip contract, field trip and athletic buses. Because they are non-reimbursable, we wanted to have them in a separate account code so when we do reports for state aid purposes, we don't inadvertently report these dollars and then have them knocked out as a disallowed claim. So again, this is just an accounting budget adjustment. We're not moving and changing the purpose of the money, but we're doing it in a way that we report, again, more efficiently and more accurately. Are there any questions about any other budget journals?
Any questions, Commissioner Patterson or Commissioner Malloy?
None at this time, thank you.
Dr. Jallo?
I have no questions.
Sorry, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Anybody in the dais have any questions?
Okay, item G, the capital project budget. These numbers are reporting on the capital improvement projects. As we look, cumulative life to date as of August 9, we had available funds in cash capital of $17.4 million and bonded or borrowed money of $15 million for a total of $32.4 million. Under item H, we talk about the significant activity in the in the capital improvement program. The first item is a $10 million transfer from the general fund to the cash capital budget. As you'll recall, each year when we adopt the budget, we put $10 million in there for the cash capital program. This is the entry to move the money from the general fund into cash capital so it can be used for those purposes. This takes place every July. The second item was an expenditure commitment of $150,000 to refinish gym floors. This was to do the floors at all the schools throughout the district other than those that have been recently refurbished or recently renovated. And the last item was $100,000 to purchase furnishings for schools, and this again is to support schools throughout the district. And typically in the summertime, based on orders, and part of it is also to restock central office supplies, and so that as things happen throughout the year, we have furniture on hand to be able to provide to schools. Any questions about the capital? Okay, item I, charter school enrollment. There is a chart that shows, a report that shows we are projecting to have 7,146 students this year and anticipating revenue, which was budgeted for, expenses of about $101.6 million. And that's very close to what we budgeted for. It may very well be that we're conservative with our projections. We think they'll be fairly close, but we don't think we don't anticipate hitting that number. But we wanted to be sure to have sufficient funding for charter school tuition as we go through the year.
Any questions for Mr. Connors? Dr. Jallo, any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Malloy?
None at this time, thank you.
Commissioner Patterson?
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams, you have any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to step back to H real quick with this money here. Is any of this money designated for the campus, leadership campus? Man, the auditorium floor really needs to be, it's really unbelievably unacceptable, the condition of it. And so I was just wondering, I see these talking about gym floor refinishing. They definitely need, it's a disgrace the way that is over there. It really is, it really is.
New building.
Yeah, I don't know about how new the building is, but I know that floor is a disgrace. Here's Mike to tell me about it.
Good evening, President Elliott, Superintendent. Yes, the auditorium, the floor in the auditorium, as well as the seating in the auditorium at Charlotte Leadership Academy, both of those need to be revitalized. So we have a plan in place to be able to do that. I'm not certain if it can be done obviously prior to the start of school, but it is on the priority list to be done. We took care of some other items in the building in preparation for Northeast to move there, and that's on the short list to be done. So once we get a more direct price quote, excuse me, we have challenges when we do a floor like that where there possibly could be asbestos tiles, and we have to make sure that we have all that taken care of before we go and dive in and replace. But there's no doubt that it needs to be replaced or freshened up. We also could look at short-term also using carpeting as well to cover it up until we can actually come up with a more permanent solution. So we got a couple of those ideas in the mix, and certainly we need to revitalize that for that school to be there. No question about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and the last item is the school food service fund. We did not include a report this month because there's such little activity in it. When we give you the August financial report package, we will have a report that will summarize their summer activity. And then when we do the September financial package, we'll go back to the regular report, which does project out the entire year for the school food service fund. And given where we are in this point of the year, we don't really have a lot of information to base that on it just yet.
Thank you.
Could I just say one quick thing? Sure. Vern?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, before you go, just wanted to say thank you for your work over the past several months to help us get over some very difficult roads. So, no, I know, but I'm just saying because I'm segueing to introducing our new CFO, but I wanted to acknowledge Vern first, just your expertise, your history with the district, and just really plugging in and working with our team and helping us, maneuver. And so thank you, personally and professionally, thank you very much.
Tell them your Bain Street got a position.
I do have to admit it was a little more than I anticipated when Malik called me.
What had happened was, and then certainly Sean wanted to welcome you formally to the district. Sean Farr started, how many days now? 2. Sean started on Monday with us and has been participating in cabinet retreat, and just wanted to welcome you, Sean, and I know that all of us are very excited to have your vast expertise and looking forward to significant contributions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes.
There is one additional report in the package, and it is a 3-year revenue summary. It was one of the findings from Dr. Jallo in our Auditor General. To make sure that we're identifying all of our revenue resources and how we access it and who's responsible for it, and also provides a 3-year history. So that's in your package. It's a point of reference that we'll be using and working from, so that we don't have a situation like we did a few months ago where we had the withhold of the $29 million. It was part of the purpose of that, to avoid situations like that in the future.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you. So can I get a motion to forward the financial reports for consideration for the business meeting? Moved by Commissioner Powell, seconded by Commissioner Malloy. Any questions or comments about that? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. All right, thank you. That moves forward. And then the next item on the agenda is consideration of a resolution 2022-23